Welcome back to another episode of the 5 Year Plan. My name is Anna. I'm your host, and we're here to talk about all the life plans that did not go according to plan. Before we get into the topic of today's discussion, I want to tell you guys about how today's solo video episode is different from the first solo video episode that I posted. In fact, it's different from all of the solo episodes that I've done so far, and I'll tell you why. A lot of you may not know this, but when I typically record these solo episodes, I do them in chunks. So, what I mean by that is if an episode is, let's say, 20 minutes long, I'm not actually going from start to finish 20 minutes. What I'll do is I'll say one or two sentences at a time and then I'll cut. Like I'll stop the recording and then I'll say the next one or two sentences. So a lot of you have told me like, "Wow, Anna, your speaking is so amazing and I don't hear a single or like." Yeah, that's because I record it like that. Okay? So I'm being honest with you guys because that's the whole point of this podcast is to reveal the behind the scene moments, to be transparent about what's going on. And so that is how I had typically recorded my solo episodes. I am not going to do that today. As best as I can, I am going to go through this from beginning to end without stopping. The only time I'll stop is if I, have a really hard time trying to figure out what I want to say and I am stumbling on my words, or if there's a sound in the background that's distracting me or makes its way into the recording and makes it sound bad. So that's what I'm going to try to do today, and we will see how this goes. Now, that's not to say that you guys won't be seeing any cuts as you're watching this episode, because sometimes when I'm doing my editing, I'll remove certain sections or I'll, switch things around or something like that. Okay. So you'll still see cuts, but just from a behind the scenes perspective, I'm going to be recording this. See, you heard that I messed up, but I'm not stopping and re-recording. I'm going to try to be recording this from beginning to end as swiftly and as smoothly as possible. Okay, so with that, let's get into the topic of today's episode. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than what I've done in the past. So if you've been listening for a while, I've now released 9 episodes, and 4 of them have been with guests. And so all of the guests that I've interviewed up to this point have talked about they've talked about what the show is supposed to be about, which is life plans not going according to plan. So the main theme that has come out of these guest episodes have been somebody who wasn't happy with their job or the first career path that they decided to take, and then they take steps to move into a different one. Today's episode is a little bit different because rather than talking about perhaps not liking your job or not feeling satisfied in your job, I want to approach it from a perspective of someone who does love their job. But nevertheless, despite loving your job and knowing that the career that you're in is the one that you want to be in, knowing that it's right for you, and really, really wanting to succeed in it, you still find yourself struggling. Maybe you're struggling with imposter syndrome. Maybe you're struggling with anxiety. Maybe you're struggling with thinking that you somehow failed your way to the top, and any moment now somebody's going to pull the curtain and reveal who you truly are, which is somebody who's not cut out for the job. The reason why I wanted to talk about this is sort of twofold. The first is because I actually came across this article written by someone, and I'm just gonna, okay, you know what? This is gonna be a cut because I have to go get it. So I do a lot of reading throughout the week in order to come up with concepts and ideas and topics to discuss on this podcast. Sometimes it comes really easily to me because it's things that I'm experiencing in my own life, but other times I need some inspiration. So this past week, I felt like I needed a bit of inspiration. So I went on the good old internet and I came across an article that someone wrote, and the article is titled, I love my job, but my anxiety is the worst it has ever been. What this girl describes in this article is she talks about how she made the transition from like a small consumer PR social media firm into a bigger corporate job in B2B or business to business communications. And she talks about how this transition has been overall very beneficial for her because she now loves her job. She writes in this article, I love my job. I love my team. I love my clients. I love the company I work for. But what she also writes is that since making that transition into her new role, work has increasingly dominated my day to day. And if I'm being totally honest, my headspace. It's the first thing I think about when I wake up. It's what keeps me awake when I'm trying to fall asleep. It's what creeps into my personal space on the weekends. And most days, it feels all consuming. So, this is the article that sort of spearheaded the idea for this topic today. But the other reason why I wanted to speak about it is because these feelings that she described in her article are feelings that I've been having in creating and building this podcast because I love this podcast. I've loved doing it. I feel so fulfilled doing it. And if I'm being honest, this podcast isn't just a hobby for me. If you've been following me for a while, or if you've spoken to me in person or heard me speak in other episodes, you'll know that this is something that I genuinely want to grow into a big show one day. I'm not just doing this for fun, okay? Most of you know this already because I've talked about it before, but I still work full time as a lawyer, and I don't really have a lot of free time anymore because any free time that I do have, I'm choosing to spend it on the podcast. And the reason why I'm doing that is because this is something that I genuinely want to see grow, and I am passionate about making it grow. But nevertheless, it has been such a roller coaster journey where some days I'm feeling like on top of the world because, I don't know, somebody who I reached out to who I never thought would respond to me responded and said that they would be happy to be in my podcast, right? I'm absolutely on top of the world. But other days I feel very lost and uncertain about how I'm going to grow this podcast, and like I'm not doing enough, or I'm not moving fast enough, or like maybe my content isn't good enough, or whatever the case may be. And so in today's episode, I want to talk to all those people who love their job, but they're still struggling. I want to talk about the 4 reasons why I think this happens and where it comes from. And I want to also talk about what we can do to help ourselves. So, welcome to today's episode of I Love My Job, so why am I still struggling? Before getting into it, I want to ask you guys a huge favor. If you've listened to this podcast before and you've liked it, or it resonated with you, or it helped you in some way, please, please, please consider liking, subscribing, or sharing this podcast, or all 3 if you want to be super generous. It helps this podcast grow, and it also helps share these type of sentiments and feelings, which is what this whole podcast is about, which is sharing stories about ourselves and others, and hopefully helping someone who's going through an uncertain period of their life feel a little bit less alone and a little bit more like they can do it and they can get through it. So if you can do that, I would appreciate it. And in return, I will promise to continue doing everything I can to produce awesome episodes for you guys and to really give my all into it. To begin, I want to say that this phenomenon of loving something so much, but it's still giving you negative feelings or you still having negative emotions around it, that can be a really off-putting thing because I think we have it in our heads sometimes that if we love what we do, if we love the career that we're in, and if we're passionate about it, then everything should be sunshine and rainbows. It should all be happy, right? We almost sometimes feel guilty about not being happy or that we're struggling and maybe not wanting to recognize it. I remember when I first started working as a lawyer, and just to give some background on that as well, where I work was genuinely not even just my dream job, but also my dream firm. And I remember there was a period where I think this was maybe 4 months after starting work, like starting full time at the firm, I got really, really, really sick. I was out for like days. And I was really upset with myself as to why I was feeling this exhaustion, right? Because it felt like everything in my life was going well. Everything was going according to plan. I had got the job that I wanted. I was starting the career that I had worked so many years to get to. Everything should be happy. And there I was feeling like I was on my deathbed and not being able to do anything. And I didn't understand where that came from. The thing I want to say about that, though, is that I think sometimes we have to think about our jobs more like a romantic relationship. Just before you jump to conclusions about what I mean by that, let me actually clarify. Hopefully, we all know what a good relationship looks like, either because we've been in it ourselves or because we've seen other people, our friends, our family, maybe our parents who are in a good relationship. The thing is, though, just because you're in a good relationship, it doesn't mean that you don't fight. It doesn't mean that you don't have problems. It doesn't mean that you don't get mad at each other or annoyed with each other. Or maybe you want to be alone sometimes and not with your partner, right? Just because you love someone and you're happy with someone and you're in a great place with someone doesn't mean that it is completely insusceptible to problems. And I think that that's sometimes what we need to remember in our careers and our jobs as well, which is that even if you're somewhere that you love and you want to be, and you're pursuing something that you care about, and you love the people around you, and everything seems to be great, it's still okay to have those slumps. And it's okay if you're in a slump right now. It's not something that you should feel guilty about. And in fact, it's completely normal. So then let's talk about why that happens. The first reason why I think that can happen is something that I'm coining called the passion tax. And where this comes from is when I was researching this episode, I was looking and reading some psychology studies, and I came across this one that talked about the different types of passion. I'll link it to the episode description below so you guys can see it and, read about it yourselves if you want. But there's this type of passion called obsessive passion. The best way I think I can explain this is when you put all of your eggs into one basket, and that basket being whatever it is that you're passionate about. So what this looks like is you pursue one thing, and you pursue that thing with so much intensity that you do it to the exclusion of everything else or almost everything else. And we've seen this before in pop culture, for example. Like for me, I don't know why. Maybe it's because I love music, but like the first thing that popped into my mind was the movie Whiplash. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Whiplash or not, but it's basically about a drummer who gets into this like very prestigious jazz band, and the expectation from the jazz band conductor, who I think is also like the main professor of the music school or something, is that you have to pursue drumming at all costs. And in the movie Whiplash, you actually see him drum so hard that his fingers and his hands start to bleed. Obviously, that's a very, very intense version of what I'm talking about here, but we see this in our real world as well. Uh, Olympic athletes are a good representation of this. Like Michael Phelps, for instance, has this quote where he says, "For 20 years, I looked at myself as a swimmer and not a human." And so, this concept of obsessive passion is this idea that everything that you're doing has to be for this one thing. And in your case, maybe that's your job. I want to pause here because I want to acknowledge that there's nothing wrong with feeling passionate about your career. Absolutely not. In fact, I think that if you're someone who does feel passionate about your career and it is something that you love to do, you are genuinely one of the luckiest people in this world, because that I think is something that's very, very difficult to find, and it's very, very special if you found it. But when you take it to an extreme, what this might look like is you give up all other facets of your life in order to pursue this one thing. And so that might look like maybe you're not sleeping enough. Maybe you're not eating well, right? Maybe you're not exercising and taking care of your health or your body. For me, by the way, those three things that I just named was absolutely all true. That's why I ended up getting sick, because I was like so excited to go to work that I wasn't really sleeping. And any free time that I had, I felt like I should be spending it at work. And so I wasn't really doing anything for myself. Like I wasn't exercising. I wasn't really eating well. Like I was eating out or eating at my desk or something like that. And so that's why I ultimately got sick, because your body just physically can't handle that. But, this might also look like your relationship suffering because you're spending so much time in every waking moment that you have doing your job or doing your career or doing this project that your friendships or your romantic relationships are suffering, or your relationships with your family are suffering. You haven't talked to your parents in X amount of months. You haven't hung out with your friends, your best friends who you've known forever and who love you and care about you and want to see you. You haven't even talked to them or made time for them. And I think where this really hits us in the head is that when we have a bad day, because we're all bound to have a bad day at some point. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, it's like a relationship. Even if you're in the greatest, healthiest, best relationship in the world, it doesn't mean you're not going to have a bad day with that person. And the same is true for your job or your career or really anything that you love and you're passionate about. But the thing is, when that's the only thing that you do and the only thing that you commit your time and energy to, when you have a bad day or when something doesn't go well for you, you don't have anyone or anything else to turn to. And that can feel incredibly isolating. The second reason I came up with is what I'm coining again as the perfectionism trap. Okay. It's basically this idea that because you love what you do, you want to do it well. And so this creates an internal pressure to make every project or every work product or every single little thing that you're doing perfect. So, to give you some examples of what that might look like, let's say you're a content creator in the content space. And by the way, this is speaking from personal experience because this is something that I have felt, which is that you want to make a video, but you want it to do well. And so it takes you forever to write the script, or maybe you film everything and you assemble a video together and you don't post it in the end because you feel like it's not good enough. If you're working in a client focused environment, maybe this means that you want every single interaction with a client to generate revenue or to reflect well on you and your company or what you're doing, right? If you work in sales, maybe this means that you want every sales call or every sales pitch to be a success, to generate some sort of deal for your company. If you're in education, maybe this means that you want every single lesson plan that you come up with to be a hit with the students, right? You want every student to resonate with what you're teaching, to pay attention. And so you spend an exorbitant amount of time and energy crafting your lesson plans. Or maybe, just maybe, you're a lawyer and you care a lot about your work and you care a lot about your clients, and you want everything that you're putting out to be perfect. You want every single work product that you're giving a senior lawyer or that you're filing with a court or a tribunal or a board, you want it to be perfect. You want it to be flawless. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to do a good job. Okay. And I want to make that very clear. But I think there is something wrong with wanting to do a perfect job. And the reason why I say that is because I think layered in or layered under this idea of perfectionism is this implicit assumption that there is a right answer and that there is only one correct answer. I'll give you an example of what this looks like for me as I'm building this podcast. So, as I've mentioned, I've had 4 guests on this podcast already, but I have actually filmed with 8 guests. So you guys have got more guest episodes coming, which is great. Every one of these guest episodes, I always draft an outline, and the outline is basically just a set of topic areas and questions under these topic areas that I send to the guests beforehand, just to make sure that, well, to make sure that they're aware of the topic areas that I may want to, get into so that they're not taken by surprise or they're not caught off guard or anything like that. But also B, to see that if there's anything that they don't like or they don't want to talk about or they don't feel comfortable talking about, they can tell me and we can, axe it out, right? But anyway, I'll give you the specific example of my episode with Jules the lawyer. I don't even want to tell you guys how long it took me to finish writing that episode outline. And there is no world where it should have taken that long. Now, obviously I didn't time myself, but if I were to guess, I probably spent upwards of 15 hours. Okay. Maybe even more. Honestly, maybe even like 20 hours. If I'm being truly honest to myself, there is no world where it should have taken me 20 hours or even 15 hours or however long I took to write that episode, particularly because I have been following her for years. Like, I have been following Jules since I was a second-year law student. So a lot of the stuff about her and the things that I wanted to know about her, I already had a sense of that, right? This wasn't a case where she was somebody who I'd never heard of before and all of a sudden I have to like learn all about her life and then come up with questions. This was not that. I already knew all about her life. My only job was to come up with questions. But the reason why it took me so long to finally craft an outline is because I wanted like every single question to be just like an absolute banger. Like, I wanted every single question to hit because I wanted the episode to be just like perfect and the best episode ever. And you would listen to the episode and watch it and be like, why is Alex Cooper even famous when you've got Anna Zhang here? Okay. But that's just not the case. And one of the reasons why it took me so long is because I was getting really, really confused as to what type of questions or what style I should ask these questions in. Because as you guys know, I listen to a lot of podcasts myself, and I do this because genuinely love podcasts, but B, because I do this as a way to teach myself how to become a podcaster, right? There's no better way to learn how to ask questions and to interview people than to listen to the best, like Stephen Bartlett, who I talk a lot about on this podcast, apparently. But anyway, that's completely besides the point. There are a lot of podcasters who I really enjoy listening to and I really love their podcast. However, every single one of them are a little bit different. No two people do or run their podcast the same way. And so what was happening with me was I would write a question, but then I'd be like, oh, but this podcaster would ask it in this way. And so then I would tweak that same question by like a few words. Basically, I would end up in a position where I've tweaked the same question like 20 times. And did it really make a difference at the end of the day? No. In fact, a lot of the questions I had quote unquote planned out, I didn't even ask because that's just not the way that our conversation went. But inherent in that experience was my belief that there was one right way to run an episode. And what this belief leads to, and as you guys can all see, definitely led to in my case, is this obsessive feedback loop where you're doing the work and then you second guess it. So then you redo it and then you second guess that and then you redo it. And basically you just end up making no movement at all because you're so obsessed with doing it perfectly that you just end up undermining yourself over and over and over and over again. This can be really exhausting. So it doesn't matter how much you love your job or how much you love what you're doing or how excited you are about it. This feeling that everything you're doing is just not enough and could be a little bit better and there's something wrong with what you're doing, that feeling is really exhausting. So to me, I think that's another reason why you can still struggle and feel like you're drowning and struggling at work, even if you love what you're doing. This sort of blends in very nicely with the third reason I came up with, which is burnout. We have this perception or this idea that feeling burned out is only for the person who is at their desk and hates their job and hates their life and can't wait to leave work every day and complains about it to their family and friends and they're miserable, or the person who has a terrible boss who's yelling at them all the time and making them work all hours of the day and calling them at midnight to have something completed for them by 7 a.m. or whatever. We often associate the term burnout to those type of people. But the truth is, burnout can happen even when you love something very much. As I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about at this part of the episode, I was reminded of an old Chinese proverb, and I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation. Sorry, mom and dad, who I know listen to this podcast, but the saying goes like this in Mandarin. It's 过犹不及, and it roughly translates to going too far is just as bad as not going far enough. And I'll just let that quote sink in for a moment. When you love something and something brings you a lot of joy, I think it's easier sometimes in those situations to overdo it. So what this might look like for you is you come home from your job and that's still all that you can think about. It's all you can think about. It's all you want to talk about. It feels impossible to turn it off. And listen, I'm not saying that, again, it's not a bad thing to care about what you're doing. Absolutely not. We need people in this world who care and love and are passionate about what they're doing, okay? But what I'm trying to say is that burnout is not reserved for just those who hate their job. I think burnout can happen sometimes even more easily to the people who love their jobs. Because think about what burnout is, right? Fundamentally, it's this idea that whatever you're doing, You're doing too much of it. You're burning yourself out because you're doing too much of it. It doesn't matter why you're doing it too much. It doesn't matter if you're doing it too much because you have a shitty boss who keeps yelling at you and keeps calling you at all hours of the night and forcing you to do this work, or if it's because you really, really love what you do and so you're not able to turn it off. It doesn't matter. It's a physiological experience, it's not a mental one. And so I think if you are someone who maybe is feeling a little bit exhausted or tired or, dare I use the term burned out at your job that you love so much with the colleagues that you love so much, relax, first of all. It doesn't mean that you're supposed to hate your job. It doesn't mean that you're in the wrong career. And it doesn't mean that your job is unsustainable. It just means that maybe what you're doing, how you're doing your job, is a little bit unsustainable. The fourth and final reason why I think this happens, and this reason is a little bit different and may not be applicable to everyone, but the fourth reason is systemic or environmental pressures. So, what this can look like and what I mean by it is maybe you love the job that you're doing and maybe you love the career that you're in, but you don't like the environment that you're in. So, if you're a teacher, maybe you really love teaching, you love working with kids, you love coming up with lesson plans, and you know that this is your passion, this is what you want to do. But maybe your colleagues are mean people, or maybe there's bureaucratic things and people being treated unfairly because of certain things that are out of your control. If you're in the corporate world, maybe it's that you like what you're doing, you find the problems that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis very interesting and intellectually stimulating and fulfilling, but you don't like the long hours. You don't like the environment. You don't like the expectation that you have to put in these long hours. I'm thinking about like investment banking, for instance. You want to talk about crazy hours? Those hours are crazy. And, this is kind of difficult to navigate sometimes because a lot of times I think the environment will come with the job. So, I gave the example of investment banking, which is like notoriously known for being one of the most tiring, long hours type of work, right? You hear about investment bankers working 100 hours every single week, and that's just the norm. That's the expectation. Everybody who works in investment banking has been through that, and everybody who doesn't work in investment banking expects an investment banker to work like that, right? So sometimes it's a bit hard to divorce what you're doing from your environment. But I think the reason why it's still important to recognize this, if this is the case, and to think this way, is because I believe, at least, in 99% of careers or jobs, there is a way to change your environment. It may not be the case for you right now if perhaps you're a junior associate at an investment banking firm. I don't know why I keep talking about investment banking. It's not like I have any experience in investment banking or like I'm qualified at all to talk about the industry. But maybe it's that you can't change it right now because you're junior. But it doesn't mean that you can't change it forever. It doesn't mean, for instance, that you can't take your passion for finance and wealth and employ it in a different way. For instance, I don't know, teaching people on YouTube how to grow their money, right? And whatever. I'm just spitballing. Again, I'm totally not qualified to talk about investment banking, so I don't know why I started on this analogy about it. I know there is at least one investment banker who has listened to this podcast, and he's probably listening to this being like, she has no idea what she's talking about. And he would be absolutely right. So I'm going to just stop talking about investment banking and talk about something that I do know, which is law. I think particularly if you're working in corporate law in certain cities like New York, it's very grueling. It's very tiring. There's a very high expectation that you bill a certain amount of hours every year, and basically this overall expectation that if you're coming into a first, second year, third year associate job, you're going to be working crazy hours. And maybe there's nothing you can do about that now, but it doesn't mean that you can't start your own practice one day. It doesn't mean that you can't go in-house and work somewhere else with a different work environment, right? It doesn't mean that you can't take what you love and and implement it in a different environment. And so I think it's still important, even if it's not something that can be separated now because it's so closely intertwined. I think it's still important to recognize that distinction, that maybe what you're struggling with isn't necessarily the job itself, but it's certain things that have to do with the environment that the job just happens to be part of. So now we're at the point of the podcast where I'm supposed to give some wise advice as to how to get over this and what to do and how to make your life happier and better. I obviously talk about these topics because these are things that I've either been through or I've watched people close to me go through. And so it's not as though I have all the answers to these things as well, but I do like to share some of the things that I've learned from my experiences, or maybe things that I've learned from my friends who've gone through these experiences, insofar as they may help you on this journey. Okay. So the first thing that I came up with is, as best as you can, try to have some type of distinct barrier or boundary between your personal life and your work. And what I mean by that is, if you have to work, I don't know, 15 hours a day, is it possible for you to do that in an office space that's not your home? Or if that's not possible for you because you're fully remote, is it possible for you to work in one area or one room of wherever you live and have sort of your living and sleeping and everything else area somewhere else? I know that may not be possible for some of you, but insofar as that is possible, to have that physical barrier between where you work and where you live, I think that that is really helpful because it almost physically forces you to change your state of mind when you're somewhere else. We know that our environment shapes the mood that we're in sometimes, right? You're going to have different feelings if you're in a classroom versus if you're at like a concert, right? Those are completely different environments that trigger different sentiments and different feelings. And so I think insofar as you're able to separate that work and home in different physical places, that might be one way to help these feelings, especially if what's causing these struggles and these feelings is the obsessive passion, like we talked about, or the inability to draw boundaries. The second thing I think that can be really helpful is finding some sort of hobby and committing to doing it like even once a week. Maybe it can be even something as simple as reading a book, 10 pages once a week. We all have time to do that. If you're telling me you don't have time to do that, yeah, you're kidding yourself. But it doesn't necessarily have to be reading. Maybe it's I don't know, going for a walk with a friend for an hour. I would argue that we all have time to do that too. If we can spend 5 hours a day scrolling on our phones, and I know that some of you listening to this get the notification every Sunday that tells you how many hours you spent on your phone, and you're like, oh my God, 5 hours and 54 minutes, like Jesus Christ. So if you can spend that much time on your phone, you can spend an hour a day, or not even a day, an hour a week hanging out with your friend, okay? But what I'm trying to get at here is just having something that's not work, something that resonates with a part of who you are and your identity, and something that makes you happy. I think the point of having something like this is a reminder to yourself that, going back to the Michael Phelps quote, you are human. You are human first, and whatever your job is second. And it's really important to remember that and to have those little things that keep you happy and that bring you joy, because your job, no matter how much you love it, it's not going to bring you happiness and bliss and joy all the time. There's going to be hard days, there's going to be difficult times. And in those times, you want to be able to rely on something that gives you joy and gives you a little bit of a sense or reminder of who you truly are. The third thing I think can really help is honestly time. I think a lot of these anxieties and struggles that we have are the greatest at the beginning of our careers. And that's not to say that you're not going to experience anxiety or stress or anything like that later on in your career, but it's a fact that, well, two things. A, the more you do something, the better you get at it. That's a fact. And B, the more you experience something, the greater your tolerance becomes for that thing. So, what I mean by that is you might be feeling of a lot of anxiety right now, but the more reps you put in, the more times you do that same thing over and over, the better you are going to be at handling those type of tasks. And the more you're not, I don't want to say like the more anxiety you deal with, but the more you put yourself in uncomfortable positions and situations and get out of it okay, the higher your tolerance is going to be for discomfort. And I think the only thing that can guarantee both of those things is time. And while that may not be encouraging because it's not something that you can do like right now to change the situation, it should still be encouraging to you because it means that every single day is going to get a little bit easier because time only travels forward, it doesn't travel backwards. And eventually you're going to look back and you're going to look at the things that used to give you anxiety, a year ago, and they're going to be just an absolute breeze now. So that takes us near the end of our episode. Once again, as a reminder, if you haven't already, please like, share, subscribe, all of that. If anything else, it will get me one step closer to dethroning Alex Cooper, and who doesn't want that? I'm just kidding. But seriously, thank you guys so much. I say thank you like every single episode, and I'm probably never going to not say thank you. Thank you so much for getting here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I am so unbelievably honored that so many of you log in and listen to these episodes every week. We're now hitting consistently over 100 downloads every single week, and that's not including YouTube. I know that might not sound like a lot right now, but it means the world to me considering that when I first started this podcast 2.5 months ago, I genuinely thought I was going to get like 10 views every week. So the fact that we are 10 times that, and it's only growing slowly but surely, but still growing. I am so thankful to all of you. It makes my day. And we'll be back. We'll be back next week.